Hi, it's Joseph Palmer at the Autodidact channel. It's February 13th, 2023, and this is the second episode of my series, Diagnosed in Aspie, about my experience being diagnosed with autism spectrum disorder as a middle-aged man. If you didn't see the first episode, then see the link in the description. If you find this series interesting, informative, helpful, or entertaining, then please press the like button below and the subscribe button if you haven't already. Last episode, I introduced myself and explained why I am producing this series. In January of 2023, I was diagnosed with Asperger's syndrome, a subtype of autism spectrum disorder, or ASD, having also been previously diagnosed with ADHD back in 2015. I discovered I have an autistic stimming need, as do most people on the spectrum, but one that presents in an unusual form. I need to communicate to an audience my observations about the world around me. I like to talk a lot and talk a lot about things that I've done and seen, and that helps me process the often overstimulating environment. It was suggested by my autism therapist that I exploit YouTube as a means to reach that audience and satisfy this stimming need. Last episode, I also explained where I was going with this series. In this one, I am going to discuss the backstory of my diagnosis. How did it happen? When did I begin to have suspicions something wasn't right with me? What specific medical help did I seek, and what was the process? Before we get into that, let me give you a setting for the story. Um, this begins about the immediate events begin in middle of November of 2022, which is about 3 months ago. Um, I'm a family man and homeowner living in a quiet northern Utah neighborhood, about a 20-minute drive north of Salt Lake City. I live with my wife of 25 years, our youngest child, who's a daughter of age 8, and our dog. Our three eldest children are adults, no longer living with us permanently, though at that time our eldest daughter is home from school for the semester. I'm employed full time at a large defense contractor as an analyst and design engineer of wireless communication systems. Over the last 12 months, I have had a string of respiratory illnesses, including 2 cases of bronchitis, which each took me out of work for several weeks at a time. I'm also having significant problems with food allergies and other gastrointestinal problems. Adding on top of all this, these physical issues, my projects of work have been somewhat chaotic lately, with last minute changes in schedules, sudden stops in work forcing me to work on a different project, then suddenly restarting. That constant disruption of routine by illness and project rescheduling has caused extreme stress. And by late November, I am feeling discouraged and insecure. I am behind on multiple tasks at work, two which must be completed by end of December. A third project requires a week-long trip out to help a customer with installation of some specialty equipment, but they keep requesting last-minute delays because they are not ready, making it very difficult to plan around the trip so I can complete the other tasks before the new year. In early December, as the Christmas and New Year holidays approach, the activity at work begins to calm down as many colleagues and government customers begin their end of year vacations. Finally, I think to myself, I have some time to get these tasks completed. As I'm about 2 days into these tasks, I begin to feel the onset of another cold, which within 24 hours rapidly becomes a new case of bronchitis, leaving me feverish, weak, and subject to racking, painful coughs. At that moment, I threw in the towel, gave up, decided my efforts were pointless. I fell into a deep depression with only my family to hold on to, my faith in God, in my memory of a YouTube video I had watched several weeks prior on the topic of autism and ADHD by the YouTuber Sam. That video had left me with suspicions that perhaps I might have autism, not just ADHD. Given my current despondent state of depression, I began to seek professional help, specifically looking for doctors or clinics who diagnose and treat autistic adults. Just a 15-minute drive from home, I was able to get an initial appointment in early January with a psychiatrist who specializes in childhood and adult autism and ADHD. So I have ADHD, but am I also autistic? This is the question that's going through my head. I've mentioned on a few occasions, my first suspicions were raised after watching the video 5 Signs You Have ADHD and Autism. I am going to give you a list of potential symptoms, which is a modification of what Sam presented with, with some additions of my own. Um, this list assumes the subject is already diagnosed with ADHD, and one is wondering if he or she may also be autistic. So, for a minute, put on your ADHD persona, even if you do not have ADHD. Put on that persona and consider these traits. Number one, you are drawn to people and you like to talk to them, but also very uncomfortable in most social situations. An apparent contradiction. You also have difficulty asking people for help. Number two, your life is disorderly, but deeply you want that not to be the case. You make frequent unsuccessful attempts to bring order into your life. You also dislike unplanned events in your life. Number three, when in a quiet environment, you become easily understimulated, which is a classical ADHD trait. But in chaotic environments, you become easily overstimulated. Number four, some classical ADHD traits do not apply to you. For example, you're not very good at multitasking. You're able to maintain interests after starting a new hobby, which is not typical for ADHD. You're also able to hyper focus and you dislike deadlines. Number five, you find it very difficult to be around other people who have ADHD, and you feel hypocritical about this. Number six, you have a history of multiple unrelated chronic health conditions. For example, sleep disorders such as sleep apnea or insomnia, multiple allergies to food, pollen, animals, etc., gastrointestinal issues such as acid reflux disease or Crohn's disease, other food sensitivities not otherwise diagnosed as another condition, autoimmune disorders such as rheumatoid arthritis or eosinophilic esophagitis, migraines, susceptibility to respiratory illnesses or ear infections. Now, not all of these indicate that you have autism, but many of these symptoms are seen in people that have both ADHD and autism. And I caught on to these when I was investigating back in November. It's what made me think that I should see a professional. Um, One of the most interesting things I learned about dual ADHD autism diagnosis is that frequently the traits from both are mutually masking. For example, autistic persons typically dislike upsets to their routine, which can be offset by the ADHD trait for multitasking and frequent needs for stimulation. Another example is that autistic persons often become very focused on one or just a few special interests, which can be balanced by the ADHD trait for curiosity and impulsiveness. Yet another is that the autistic can be extremely introverted, which can be balanced by the ADHD trait of social extroversion. This mutual masking is not all good. I will talk about masking in more detail in my next video, but for now, let me say that though ADHD traits help to mask autistic traits, they do not save one from many of the negative physical consequences. For example, my ADHD helps me overcome my autistic aversion towards strangers, but I still suffer physical stress from the overstimulating experience of meeting a new person. Another example is regarding special interests. ADHD helps me to avoid becoming focused on only one or two special interests because my increased curiosity opens me to new possibilities. However, this means I now juggle dozens of special interests instead of one or two because it's difficult to drop a new special interest when I have begun looking into it. So, in summary, ADHD helped me to mask many of my autistic traits, which enabled me to better operate in the real world. For that, I feel a certain degree of gratitude, but I also recognize that the masking was ultimately my undoing. The ADHD caused me to frequently step into situations unhealthy for my autistic mind. And over the years, as I got older, the constant overstimulation, disruption of routine, and overwhelming number of special interests led me into physical and mental exhaustion. Autistic burnout is what we call the condition of an autistic person who is suffering from physical and mental exhaustion and is now unable to function normally, at least as the world would perceive normal functioning. This is precisely what I experienced in early December, triggered by my third bout of bronchitis in 12 months, while I was trying to finish up some final projects at work. In hindsight, I now see that it was not the first time I had suffered an autistic burnout during my life, though it was by far the worst. However, I can think of over a half dozen instances of burnout I've suffered since childhood. And I'll go through these examples in case it helps some of you recognize this in your own life. The first memorable burnout I had was at age 17, the middle of my senior year in high school, after becoming overwhelmed by school, social, and family life. Age 20, my second burnout, 1 year into a 2 year stint as a missionary for my church in Mexico after health issues disrupted my routine. Age 23, my third burnout, sophomore year in college, after I began having new food sensitivity problems. There was a bunch of foods that had not been an issue for me up to that date, and suddenly I began having a lot of dietary issues. Age 36, my fourth burnout, 2 years after completing my PhD, after attempting to simultaneously hold a full time job and help part time at a startup. This burnout eventually led to my ADHD diagnosis. Age 42, after 3 years of 70-hour weeks supporting research and development of multiple satellite flight programs, I suffered a very severe burnout that I've never really fully recovered from. Age 47, and this is in December, after a series of respiratory illnesses and project disruptions at work. And this burnout led to my diagnosis of autism. And it was much more severe because I had never fully recovered from the previous burnout since I was not allowing my body to rest and recover. Um, so if you look at these dates and these symptoms, with periods of burnout between 3 to 6 years, except for a long gap between age 23 and 36. Much of that time was when I was in graduate school. I found higher education to be a very healthy environment for me. So, this video is supposed to be about my diagnosis. So let me return to what happened with my doctor. During the 4 weeks until my scheduled appointment, I spent some time doing additional research on autism. I arrived at the appointment with a mental list of evidence for my autism, thinking that I would need to be well prepared with specific evidence for a number of different criteria. Um, I assumed were required for a diagnosis, but in the end, it was much easier than that. I met with my new doctor for about 1 hour. He asked me a lot of questions. At the end, he said, without question, I have ASD, more specifically the type which was formerly called Asperger's syndrome. Indeed, he was astounded I had not been previously diagnosed, but I've been masking my whole life. At the time that I met with him, I had begun to unmask as I had learned about what masking is, which is why he was probably astounded. Now, my treatment to date has consisted of two main components. First, treating the severe depression resulting from autistic burnout. And this includes antidepressants, weekly outpatient ketamine therapy, and daily meditation. Um, the second important component of my treatment is I'm now seeing a therapist for coaching to improve my coping strategies for autism and ADHD. I'm only a month into my treatment, but to date it's been extremely effective. I have to say that I'm feeling the best that I've felt in many, many years, at least 5 years, if not longer. So this episode's gone on long enough for today. So, in conclusion, for the next episode, I plan to talk about autistic masking, what it is, why some of us do it, and why it's not always a good idea. If you enjoyed this episode, then please press the like button below and share the video with others. This will help promote the channel. Also, please press the subscribe button if you haven't already. That way you will know when the next episode comes out. This is Joseph Palmer at the Autodidact. Keep learning.